Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into a world you've probably never thought about before the slow, sudsy life of laundry workers in ancient Egypt. Forget the pyramids for a moment. Forget the golden masks and hieroglyphics that textbooks always shove at you. Instead, picture yourself standing barefoot on a sandy street at dawn, the air still cool from the night, but already carrying the faint tang of river water, sweat, and natron. You're about to join the invisible army of men and women who scrub, pound, and rinse cloth until their hands are raw. And just a heads up, you probably wouldn't survive a week at this job without developing calluses the size of scarabs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where and when you're listening in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as you shuffle down the street of Thebes is the sound. Not the chatter of merchants yet, not the thumping of bronze tools, but the quieter, more rhythmic swish of buckets being filled. Laundry workers head toward the Nile in a kind of sleepy parade, balancing jars and reed baskets on their heads. You join them, half awake, tripping a little on the oven path, and suddenly you feel like part of a secret morning ritual, like this whole undercurrent of Egyptian life was hidden beneath the more glamorous headlines of history. The air smells of last night's cook fires mixed with damp earth. A donkey brays somewhere behind you, annoyed at being awake this early. Kids dart between adults, chasing each other before being shooed away with a sharp, "Enough!" And ahead the horizon glows pink as the sun prepares to haul itself up like a tired god who overslept. You probably imagine ancient Egypt as eternally glamorous, all gleaming temples and rich perfumes. Reality check. Most people smelled like a combination of sweat, ash, and yesterday's beer. Laundry was less about smelling good and more about simply not rotting inside your own tunic. One mainstream fact to keep you anchored linen was the fabric of Egypt. Lightweight, breathable, and produced in absurd amounts. Almost everyone wore it, from pharaoh to farmhand, and that meant an unending cycle of washing, drying, and wearing. As you reach the riverbank, you notice how much of the city seems to funnel toward this artery. Traders will arrive later with papyrus bundles. Fishermen will drag in their catch. But right now, the laundry workers dominate. They squat near the shallows, their baskets arranged like a ragged fence, and plunge their hands into water so cold it stings. Some pound fabric against smooth stones with a practiced rhythm whack. Whack, swish, while others stomp on garments in shallow basins, letting their feet do the work. And yes, you're suddenly aware that if you slipped and fell into the Nile here, you might end up as breakfast for a lurking crocodile. Comforting thought. The workers trade stories as they scrub. One woman complains that her husband insists his linen headcloth gets cleaner when soaked in sour beer, which, let's be honest, probably just makes him smell like a pub. Another teases her neighbor about leaving a tunic in the water too long, pointing out that a crocodile probably has better laundry skills. You laugh under your breath, realizing that humor hasn't changed much in a few thousand years. Historians still argue whether this job was considered lowly or respected. On one hand, it was grueling, smelly, and endless. On the other, clean linen was so central to Egyptian identity that the people who maintained it might have carried more importance than we give them credit for. Imagine society collapsing. If every modern laundromat just quit at once, you'd get chaos within a week. The same principle applied here, only with more sand and more donkeys. You kneel by the edge, splashing your hands into the Nile, and instantly feel the cool shock. The water carries silt, fish, maybe a little sewage from upstream you. Try not to think about that part. You're handed a small bundle of clothes to scrub, and the rough fibers of linen rasp against your palms. It's strangely grounding, like you're tied to the rhythm of this ancient city through something as mundane as laundry. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some Egyptians believed certain stains carried bad luck, especially if left unwashed. Blood, for example, might attract spirits if not cleaned away. You glance at the workers pounding fiercely on one tunic and wonder if they're scrubbing for cleanliness or exorcism. The sun climbs higher, your arms ache. You imagine yourself complaining, but the worker next to you looks at your soft modern hands and smirks. You wouldn't last. And maybe that's the point. This isn't glamorous history, it's survival history. The daily grind, the forgotten labor, the people who kept life moving while the kings posed for statues. By mid-morning, the street behind you buzzes louder. Merchants call, children scream, but here by the river, the rhythm stays steady. Lift, pound, rinse, ring, repeat. The cycle stretches endlessly, like the Nile itself. And for now, you're caught in it, just another tired washer watching the city wake up, knowing you'll be here again tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. The sun creeps a little higher, and you're swept along in the morning's steady choreography. Buckets dip, splash, rise, and slosh against your legs as workers bend and straighten in practiced rhythm. This isn't chaos, it's muscle memory performed hundreds of times a week. You balance a clay jar awkwardly on your shoulder, trying not to spill more than you keep, while the person next to you glides as if born with the Nile in their spine. The riverbank hums. A group of women kneel side by side, each with a reed basket beside her, dipping and ringing with a tempo like drum beats. A man nearby stomps on a heap of wet linen inside a shallow clay trough, his bare feet squishing rhythmically, and he grins as though it's the closest thing he'll get to dancing today. You're told to pound cloth against a flat stone, and after the first dozen strikes, your arms burn. The worker next to you laughs softly, saying something about how city folks can't keep pace. You pretend you're not dying. It's in these repetitive motions that the day really begins. Fetch water, scrub, rinse, wring, lay the cloth out to dry. Fetch, scrub, rinse, wring, lay. The cycle repeats until it feels less like work and more like a heartbeat. And while you sweat and grunt, the workers gossip. They exchange rumors about the temple priests, roll their eyes at officials demanding perfectly white linen, and debate who in the neighborhood makes the best beer. You might imagine soap bars or fragrant detergents, but reality checked no lavender-scented bubbles here. Instead, the Egyptians relied on a mix of natron, a natural salt, ash, or sometimes a splash of sour beer. Yes, your tunic might be cleaner afterward, but it'll also smell like someone spilled a tavern on you. One mainstream historical fact worth noting: natron wasn't just a laundry additive. It was also used in mummification. So, in a slightly macabre twist, the same substance that stripped grime from your shirt also stripped moisture from corpses. Sleep tight with that thought. Meanwhile, you feel the Nile's presence as both friend and threat. Its flow provides everything: water, transport, fertile soil. But up close, it slaps against your ankles with a strength that makes you nervous. Children are shooed away from the edge, and every so often someone jerks their head toward deeper water, just to check for that telltale ripple of a lurking crocodile. Quirky fact time. Some workers believe beating clothes against stones not only drove out dirt, but also expelled spirits clinging to the fabric. You glance down at the tunic you're whacking and wonder who or what you've just insulted by accident. A small boy runs past carrying a dripping reed bucket, nearly tripping over your feet. He's laughing, his mother chasing after him with a string of curses that don't require translation. Humor bubbles up everywhere here. Someone cracks a joke about how the pharaoh himself must have 100 washermen just for his loincloths. Another jokes that the gods surely wear white linen because nobody wants to see Ra in stained underwear. You laugh out loud this time, drawing a look that says, "Careful, stranger, the gods might be listening." Historians still argue whether men or women dominated this trade. Scenes from tomb paintings show both, though sometimes it's unclear whether the men are supervising or working. You glance around now and see the reality. Whoever can lift, pound, and wring without collapsing gets the job. Gender doesn't stop a tunic from stinking. As the sun climbs higher, the rhythm deepens. Water is fetched in steady streams from the river, carried in jars balanced on heads, shoulders, and hips. Stains are attacked with knuckles, with stones, with sand rubbed directly into the fabric. A group starts to sing a lilting chant that rises and falls like the river itself. The words slip past you, but the melody works like a spell, turning drudgery into something communal, maybe even joyful. You find your hands moving in time with the beat, each whack of fabric a percussion note. Your muscles ache, your tunic clings with sweat, but something about the routine begins to soothe you. It's hypnotic: dip, scrub, rinse, wring, lay flat on reeds to dry. The heat presses down, but the splash of river water cools your calves. For a moment, you're no longer an outsider fumbling through. You're simply part of the morning, one more body bent toward the Nile, trading stories, sharing work, keeping the city clothed. By late morning, the riverbank smells like a paradox. On one hand, you catch whiffs of wet linen drying in the sun, carrying a faint, grassy freshness. On the other hand, the buckets of natron, ash, and sour beer emit a funk that sticks to the back of your throat. You wrinkle your nose, but nobody else seems to notice. For the workers, this cocktail of odors is just the scent of survival. You dip a tunic into a basin where someone has poured in natron, a naturally occurring salt harvested from desert lakes. It stings your knuckles a little, drying the skin, but it does the job lifting sweat and grime from the fibers. A mainstream historical fact slips into place. Natron wasn't only used in laundry. It was also sprinkled on kitchen floors as a disinfectant and, most famously, employed in mummification to dry out bodies. Imagine that your shirt and a pharaoh's corpse sharing the same chemical treatment. Not exactly the glamorous association you wanted. Still, natron is a luxury compared to some other concoctions. You hear about ash mixed with water until it turns into a gray sludge. It scrapes away dirt, sure, but it also leaves behind streaks that have to be rinsed again and again. Then there's the strangest mixture of all beer left out too long, soured into a sharp-smelling liquid. Some workers swear it lifts oil stains better than anything else. You dunk your hands in one such basin and instantly regret it. Now you smell like you lost a drinking contest. A worker nearby chuckles at your grimace. "Clean doesn't mean sweet," she mutters, wringing out a tunic with expert twists of her wrists. And she's right, Egyptian cleanliness wasn't about smelling like roses. It was about ridding fabric of visible grime and keeping disease at bay. After all, in a hot climate where sweat and dust cling to every pore, perfection wasn't possible. You wonder, briefly, how many royal banquets were attended by people smelling faintly of sour beer. Quirky tidbit? Some laundry workers believe that if cloth smelled too fragrant, it might actually attract evil spirits. Better to smell neutral or even slightly unpleasant than risk catching the attention of something supernatural. Suddenly, your sour beer-soaked hands feel like spiritual protection. Silver linings. The gossip along the riverbank turns toward the smells themselves. One man jokes that the priests must bathe their holy linens in perfume while the rest of them choke on beer fumes. Another says the pharaoh's undergarments probably smell of lotus blossoms, though historians still argue whether perfumed oils were ever added to laundry or just dabbed directly onto the body. You imagine a royal laundry workshop, a little more luxurious perhaps, but still full of pounding, wringing, and the same stubborn sweat stains. No amount of incense would fully erase those. Your nose begins to adjust, strangely enough. The stink of ash water no longer makes your stomach twist. The sour beer just smells like work. It blends with the river's earthy tang and the faint aroma of sun-baked reeds. By now you can tell which batch of linen is soaking in what mixture just by walking past. Natron has a sharp mineral snap. Ash is acrid. Beer is unmistakably pungent. And together, they create the background perfume of the city, the hidden bass note of ancient Egypt. Forget frankincense and myrrh. This is the real fragrance of daily life. A child wanders by holding a strip of half-washed cloth over her nose, pretending it's a beard. The women around her burst into laughter, and someone quips that even the gods would cover their faces if they had to breathe in laundry fumes. You catch yourself laughing too, half choked by the air, but comforted by the humor woven into every task. Your skin is dry and itchy from the natron, your hands red and raw. But you keep going, realizing that everyone here does this every single day without complaint. The smell may never fully wash away, but neither does the pride in their work. They keep the city clothed, the temples pure, the bodies of the dead properly wrapped. And if that means living in a haze of sour beer and ash, so be it. By now the sun is high, shadows shrinking beneath baskets and jars. The smell thickens in the heat, wrapping you like an invisible cloak. You breathe it in, part resignation, part weird acceptance. It's no longer a punishment, it's initiation. And you know that when you leave this riverbank, no matter how many times you rinse your own skin, a trace of ancient Egyptian laundry will cling to you, maybe forever. The heat bears down now, pressing into your shoulders, but the work doesn't pause. If anything, the pace quickens, because the linen must be washed and spread out early enough to dry before nightfall. You glance around and realize not all linen is treated equally. In fact, the piles of fabric scattered across the riverbank tell an unspoken story of social hierarchy: who matters more, who matters less, and who can afford to never touch their own dirty tunics. On one side, you see coarse work shirts from farmers, heavy with sweat, dirt, and oil. They're beaten mercilessly against stones, scrubbed with ash water until the fibers grown. On another side, you spot finer cloth, whiter, smoother, more delicately woven, that's treated with far more care. The workers crouched over these tunics don't slam them on rocks. They gently press, knead, and rinse as if afraid of tearing. These belong to scribes, merchants, and nobles, people who would never come near the river themselves. It dawns on you, laundry here reflects class as clearly as jewelry or tomb paintings. Linen wasn't just clothing in Egypt, it was wealth. The finer the weave, the closer to royalty you were. A mainstream historical fact underscores the thought. Some linen was woven so fine that ancient writers compared it to spider silk, and priests wore these nearly transparent robes during rituals. And guess who had to wash them without snagging a single thread? Yep, the laundry workers. You pick up one such delicate piece and feel the difference immediately. It slips through your fingers like water, unlike the scratchy tunic you scrubbed earlier. A woman beside you warns softly not to wring it too hard. "Belongs to a temple priest," she says, with just enough weight in her tone to suggest consequences if it's damaged. You nod, handling it as though it might dissolve in your hands. Meanwhile, peasants wash their own rough tunics right at the river's edge. They squat, scrub, rinse, and lay garments over stones without ceremony. Their laughter carries, less burdened by the fear of ruining expensive cloth. For them, clothes are tools, not symbols. It's only when you turn back toward the temple linens that you realize how high the stakes can be, for those tasked with caring for the wealthy. A quirky tidbit makes its way into the chatter. Some nobles were so particular about their linens that they demanded they be washed in water drawn only at sunrise, believing it carried pure energy. You picture a poor laundry worker stumbling half asleep to the river at dawn, all because someone wanted their underwear blessed by the morning light. But not everyone agrees on these practices. Historians still argue whether such rituals were widespread or only the quirks of a few eccentric elites. Were these linen obsessions part of daily life or exaggerated in temple texts? No one can say for sure, but the nervous glances exchanged whenever a noble's garment is mentioned suggest that, eccentric or not, the demands were very real to the workers. A boy jogs past carrying a bundle wrapped in reed matting. Inside, you glimpse embroidered hems glinting faintly in the sunlight. These are high-ranking garments, delivered under guard, as if they were treasure. And in a way they are. Linen was often used as currency, and the workers know exactly how valuable each piece in their hands might be. The gossip shifts again. One woman mutters that noblemen will strut around in spotless white tunics, never knowing the calloused hands that bled to keep them clean. Another worker jokes that if nobles had to scrub their own robes once, they'd trade half their gold just to stop. You grin, imagining a pampered scribe trying to wrestle a tunic against a pounding stone and giving up after 2 minutes. By now, the sun has made the river water shimmer blindingly, and the workers squint against the glare. The noble cloth is carefully laid on reed mats away from dust, while the peasants' rough tunics are flung over bush, fences, or even just rocks. The contrast couldn't be sharper. One group's garments treated like relics, the other like rags. And yet, both sets are linen, both born from the same flax fields, both destined to wear thin eventually. You pause, holding a damp tunic in your aching arms, and realize this hierarchy isn't only about fabric. It's about power. It's about who has time to let someone else touch their dirt, and who must scrub their own life clean. The river reflects it all, carrying rich and poor side by side in its current, yet never letting them mix. As the breeze picks up, you catch the sharp scent of natron on the fine linen, mingling with the earthier stench of peasant tunics drying nearby. The smells overlap, inseparable now, just like the society that produced them, divided yet intertwined, stitched together by the very act of washing. The longer you linger by the Nile, the clearer it becomes. This riverbank is more than just a workplace. It's theater. It's a marketplace of glances and whispers, laughter and side-eyed comments. Laundry may be the task, but human drama is the show. And you, still dripping from your awkward scrubbing attempts, are in the middle row of the best kind of boring entertainment, the kind that goes on every day, unnoticed yet endlessly alive. You hear the first ripple of laughter long before you know why. Two women are kneeling in the shallows, wringing cloth with fierce precision. One suddenly sings a mocking line, a half-verse about a neighbor's lazy husband who sleeps while the Nile works for him. The nearby workers burst into giggles, knowing exactly which man she's targeting. Across the bank, the husband in question throws up his hands, pretending to be wounded, before firing back a teasing insult about her cooking that tastes like sand. The crowd roars. You realize that laundry is also improv comedy hour. And of course, where there's laughter, there's flirting. A young man stomps cloth in a clay basin, making sure his rhythm is extra loud. Every stomp is a thud announcing, "Look how strong my calves are." Across from him, a girl bends low to rinse a tunic, pretending not to notice him except she flicks a stream of water his way. He splashes back. Within minutes, half the riverbank is cheering them on, shouting mock wedding vows. You can't help but grin. Maybe Tinder was always a river away. The gossip is relentless. Someone whispers about a temple priest seen leaving a tavern after dark, his once white linen now suspiciously wine-stained. Another speculates that a wealthy merchant has his tunics bleached not for cleanliness, but to impress a new mistress. You lean in, intrigued, until someone elbows you with a grin. Careful, if you listen too much, you'll be tomorrow's rumor. Mainstream historical facts sliding in here. Egyptian society valued gossip almost as much as grain. Records show neighbors tattled on one another in court documents, and chatter flowed through markets and workspaces like a second river. Laundry day was prime time for rumor distribution. But beyond the jokes and whispers lies something more serious: negotiation. You overhear two workers haggling over payment for washing a noble's robe. One insists on an extra measure of barley in return for the delicate work. The other argues that the priest will provide blessings instead of food. Blessings don't fill bellies, the first retorts. Voices rise, then fall again into muttered compromise. It's clear this riverbank is also a marketplace of labor. Quirky tidbit for you. Some Egyptians believed that gossip spoken over running water carried farther, as though the Nile itself became a messenger. That explains why a few people lower their voices, glancing at the current nervously. You half joke to yourself that maybe this river has been the longest-running news network in history. Of course, historians still argue whether workers like these were independent, hired out for odd jobs, or permanently attached to temples and estates. Some evidence suggests both existed: freelancers hustling by the river, and permanent staff who lived within noble households. Standing here, surrounded by laughter, arguments, and secret side deals, you realize the answer might be both all at once. The social energy rises with the sun. Kids play tag between baskets, weaving through legs and nearly toppling jars of water. Older women shake their heads, muttering about youth these days, though their eyes shine with amusement. One man pulls out a small reed flute and begins to play, the high notes curling above the splashing river. For a few minutes, everyone's movements sync to the music. Pounding cloth, stomping feet, wringing hands, all keeping time. You let yourself sway with it, realizing that you're no longer just watching, you're part of the ensemble. And yet, beneath the comedy and the melodies, you sense the sharp edge of survival. A missed payment here, a ruined tunic there, and reputations collapse. Workers tease each other, yes, but they also know how precarious their livelihood is. The laughter hides the grind. By afternoon, the riverbank looks less like a workplace and more like a carnival fading into heat haze. You catch yourself yawning, not from boredom, but from the hypnotic repetition of voices, splashes, and sun. Every joke, every rumor, every side glance folds into the endless rhythm of wash and ring. This is life's background music, no pyramids, no monuments, just people trying to stay clothed, amused, and alive. You wring out one last tunic, slap it onto a reed mat, and sit back. The theater of laundry continues around you, scenes flowing into one another without intermission. The Nile glitters, carrying away dirt, gossip, and secrets while the city hums on, barely noticing that its stage is here along the water's edge. By mid-afternoon, the Nile's breeze starts to thin, and the weight of the sun presses heavier on your neck. Sweat runs down your back in slow rivulets, soaking into the fabric of your own tunic until you wonder if someone else will be scrubbing it tomorrow. Around you, the workers don't pause. If anything, they seem resigned to the punishment of the climate, their bodies moving as automatically as the river itself. The heat is its own character here, loud, relentless, and bossy. Every bucket you lift feels heavier than the last, as though the sun has snuck weights inside. The glare off the water blinds you until your eyes ache. Dust drifts from the paths leading down to the riverbank, clinging to damp skin and mixing with sweat to form a sticky second layer of grime. You imagine showering, then remember showers don't exist yet. Reality check: the Nile is all you get. Someone beside you mutters that the gods must be roasting fish for dinner, and you laugh despite the sting in your eyes. Humor again, always the shield. Another worker waves a hand dramatically at the sky, begging Ra to turn down the brightness just a notch. The riverbank chuckles, but nobody actually stops working. Mainstream historical fact to anchor this moment: Egypt's climate was both blessing and curse. The dry heat preserved mummies and monuments for millennia. But it also meant daily labor under conditions that would flatten most of us in hours. Laundry, with its constant bending, lifting, and hauling, was doubly brutal in the midday sun. You stretch out a freshly washed tunic on a reed mat, only to watch it stiffen almost instantly in the dry desert wind. Within minutes, the cloth looks more like a board than fabric. Workers slap and snap the garments to soften them again, filling the air with sharp cracks. You try it yourself and nearly smack your own face. The woman next to you grins, shaking her head. "Needs practice," she says. A quirky tidbit sneaks in here. Some Egyptians believed the desert winds could carry illness, so they sometimes muttered protective phrases while laying garments out to dry. You watch a man whisper something under his breath as he stretches cloth across a bush. Maybe superstition, maybe habit, but either way, it adds another layer of mystery to what looks like simple drudgery. The air itself begins to shimmer. The city in the distance wavers like a mirage, and yet the riverbank remains grounded in rhythm: lift, ring, snap, stretch, over and over. You feel your muscles burning with every repetition, your body slowly matching theirs. Historians still argue whether workers timed their tasks deliberately around the hottest hours or simply endured them. Some evidence suggests breaks under shade trees, while others believe constant labor was necessary to keep up with demand. Standing here, sweat blinding you, you can see both sides. Part of you longs to collapse under the nearest palm, but the pile of unwashed linen waiting behind you insists otherwise. The smell of drying cloth mixes with the scent of hot dust and your own sticky skin. It's not pleasant, but it's strangely grounding. You wipe your brow with the back of your arm, which is pointless because your arm is just as sweaty. A man beside you offers a sarcastic tip. Spit on your hands before wringing, it cools them. You give him a look, and he shrugs, grinning. Better than nothing. You don't try it. Children return with jars of river water, their feet kicking up clouds of dust that drift across the drying linen. Instantly, workers shout, scolding them for undoing hours of scrubbing. The kids scatter, laughing, leaving behind faint footprints in the powdery soil. For a moment, you marvel at how the riverbank holds every part of life work. Play, irritation, and love pressed together like layers of linen. By now, the rhythm of heat and wind feels endless, like the background noise of existence. Your arms ache, your lips crack, your body begs for rest, but the workers just keep going. You realize this isn't just laundry, it's endurance training, survival disguised as routine. And you're barely holding on, one more body under the weight of sun and sand, praying for the smallest gust of breeze to break the monotony. The afternoon light softens just slightly, but the air still feels like it's pressing its thumb down on you. By now, you've begun to notice that not every garment being scrubbed and wrung here belongs to ordinary townsfolk. Some bundles arrive wrapped in careful matting, their owners hovering nearby to supervise. These aren't just dirty tunics, they're temple cloths, ritual garments, and sacred wrappings that carry a weight beyond dust and sweat. A boy sets one such bundle at your feet, his eyes wide with importance. You untie the reed string and carefully unfold a long strip of white linen, finer than most cloth you've handled all day. Immediately, the workers around you fall quieter, their laughter tapering into hushed murmurs. This isn't just laundry anymore, it's devotion. Mainstream historical fact: temples in Egypt required enormous amounts of clean linen. Priests changed their garments several times a day, wearing only fresh white linen during rituals to symbolize purity. That meant a constant demand for spotless cloth, and someone had to keep the cycle running. That someone, of course, was the laundry worker. You kneel, dipping the fabric gently into the Nile. The water flows cool and steady, but you can't shake the feeling that this isn't ordinary rinsing. It's part of a ritual, whether you want it to be or not. The woman beside you mutters a short prayer under her breath as she works, words carried softly by the current. Her fingers press firmly but carefully, as if the cloth itself might bite back if mistreated. Quirky tidbit: there are tales that certain stains, especially blood on ritual cloths, were treated not just as dirt but as spiritual pollution. Workers might wash them while reciting protective phrases, or even refuse the task altogether, fearing divine retribution. You imagine the pressure: scrub too hard and risk tearing sacred cloth, scrub too little and risk angering a god. No wonder the workers' jokes quiet here. As you stretch the cloth over a smooth reed mat, you notice faint embroidered edges glinting in the sun. Someone whispers that this piece will drape an altar tomorrow, that its whiteness will reflect torchlight in a way meant to remind worshippers of the gods themselves. And yet here it is, dripping river water onto your toes. The sacred and the ordinary touch in such mundane ways. Historians still argue whether laundry for temples was performed directly by temple staff or contracted out to neighborhood workers. Judging by the reverence around you, it's possible both were true, some garments kept under priestly control, others entrusted to careful hands along the riverbank. But what's clear is that everyone here understands the stakes. One man, half smiling, half serious, says that if a crocodile ever snatched a priest's robe from the current, the whole city would panic. You laugh nervously, but a few workers cross themselves against evil, glancing at the water as though daring it to prove them wrong. The gossip returns slowly, cautiously. Someone jokes that priests change clothes so often because they're too lazy to scrub stains themselves. Another adds that if purity were measured in linen changes, the gods must spend half their time doing laundry. The group chuckles, tension lifting like steam off the river. Even reverence needs a release valve. As you fold the garment carefully, your fingers still damp, you realize you've just helped prepare a piece of history that will never be recorded. No one will carve your name on a temple wall. No one will write a hymn about the washer who kept holy linen white. Yet, without this unseen labor, the rituals themselves would falter. The splendor of temples depended on suds and sweat. The sun tilts westward, throwing long glimmers across the Nile. Workers pack away some ordinary tunics, but keep tending to the sacred bundles with deliberate care. The line between dirt and devotion blurs until you're not sure where laundry ends and liturgy begins. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe it never did end. The sun now hangs low enough to turn the Nile into a long strip of molten copper. Shadows stretch, and the air finally loosens its grip, just slightly. You've survived the heat, the scrubbing, and the starch dust, but now comes the part where laundry stops being just clean fabric and turns into fashion, status, and let's be honest, gossip fodder. A bundle arrives wrapped in bright-dyed cloth, unusual against the sea of pale linen. The workers murmur it belongs to a merchant's wife, someone whose idea of style goes well beyond plain white. You unfold the pieces and notice faint pink tints and faded blue edging. You blink. Yes, it's linen, but linen that once brushed shoulders at a feast, not temple steps. And you realize laundry is also where society's vanity leaves its stains. Mainstream historical fact. Although white linen was the most common, wealthier Egyptians sometimes had their garments dyed or pleated in elaborate styles. Pleating was a delicate art achieved by pressing damp cloth into folds and drying it in place, resulting in that iconic, zigzag texture you see in museum statues. The problem? Sweat and dirt ruined pleats, which meant laundry workers weren't just cleaning. They were often repleating garments by hand. That's not laundry, that's couture. You watch as a seasoned worker takes one of the wrinkled pieces and begins to reset the pleats, pinching and smoothing in rhythm, almost like a weaver working backward. It looks painstaking, and you instantly understand why they muttered when the bundle arrived. Pleats may look effortless on a wealthy woman strolling through a courtyard, but behind her elegance lies someone's aching fingers and sore back. Quirky tidbit. Some fashion-conscious elites supposedly rubbed perfumed oils into their freshly cleaned linen, meaning laundry workers had to deliver not just cleanliness but also fragrance. Imagine scrubbing someone's sweat out, then delicately dabbing their cloth with lotus oil, basically the ancient Egyptian version of a scented dryer sheet. The workers tease one another while handling these special clothes. One jokes that the merchant's wife will never know her signature pleats were set by a half-sleeping teenager with river-wet hands. Another adds that if anyone saw her garments laid out here beside sweaty work tunics, her pride would unravel faster than the pleats. Laughter bubbles up, but it's tinged with resignation. They know tomorrow will bring another bundle, another round of delicate work no one praises. Historians still argue whether laundry workers doubled as early fashion stylists, or if wealthy households kept private servants just for garment care. But evidence suggests that even when elites had personal attendants, much of the dirty work still ended up at riverbanks like this. In other words, even luxury trickled down into communal suds. You glance at your own tunic, simple, stiff, starting to smell faintly of starch. You can't imagine anyone caring enough to pleat it, let alone dab it with perfume. Yet here you are, watching cloth transformed from crumpled rags back into symbols of wealth and refinement. And you realize something quietly comic. The people who strut proudly in these outfits owe their entire look to the same workers they'd never greet on the street. A breeze ripples across the Nile, lifting the drying pleats into tiny waves of shadow and light. They shimmer faintly in the setting sun like fish scales caught in motion. For a second, you catch the beauty in it, the way laundry, fashion, and craft merge into art. And then a worker beside you sighs and mutters, "It'll be sweaty again by tomorrow night." The magic deflates, but you can't help smiling. As twilight spreads, the talk turns practical, folding, stacking, and bundling for return. The fashion pieces get extra attention, wrapped in clean mats to prevent creasing. Regular tunics are piled roughly, a clear visual hierarchy of cloth. And you see it plainly, laundry isn't just about hygiene, it's about reinforcing class, showing who has the means to keep their linen pristine, pleated, and perfumed. The Nile catches the last glow of the day, and you feel the weight of both sweat and status clinging to your skin. Tonight, the city will gleam in white linen, soft folds shimmering in torchlight. But here, on the riverbank, you're left with stiff hands, wet feet, and the nagging thought that fashion has always depended on invisible labor. Night creeps over Memphis with the kind of slowness that feels almost deliberate, as if the city is stretching before bed. You're still on the riverbank, but the bustle of washing has given way to a quieter rhythm. Now, bundles are stacked, garments folded, and workers begin the final act of their day, delivery. And guess what? Laundry doesn't deliver itself. Boy younger than you hefts a pile twice his size, wobbling under the weight. His job is to ferry these fresh linens back to their owners. You follow along, partly curious, partly unwilling to let the day end without seeing where the laundry finally lands. The streets are lively still, torches flicker, vendors shout, neighbors bickering through it all. You and the bundle bearers thread silently, weaving between donkeys, traders, and laughing children. Mainstream historical fact, Laundry wasn't just dropped off at random. Workers either returned garments directly to households or delivered them to intermediaries at market stalls. Some temples even managed laundry for their priests, ensuring sacred linens stayed immaculate. Imagine being on the payroll of the gods, responsible for making sure holy robes stayed dazzling white. No pressure, right? At one doorway, a wealthy merchant servant takes the folded stack without a thank you, tossing a copper or two as if feeding pigeons. The coins clink to the ground, and the boy scrambles to grab them before they roll into the gutter. You feel the stink-leaning sweat and grime from fine linen earns less gratitude than pouring beer. The servant closes the door without a glance, and just like that, the household gleams while the hands that made it so remain invisible. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that people believe dirty laundry could harbor bad luck or illness, so families were eager to get it back clean and swiftly. This turned laundry delivery into something like a ritual exchange. A clean tunic wasn't just comfort, it was protection. You think of the merchant's wife, draped in pleated linen rubbed with lotus oil, and imagine her secretly convinced that stains might invite misfortune. The delivery trail continues, winding into neighborhoods where the houses shrink and the doors open more willingly. Here, common folk grin as they take back their clothes, some even offering figs or dates as thanks. They know the effort it takes because tomorrow they'll be the ones scrubbing again. You notice how gratitude seems inversely proportional to wealth. The richer the linen, the poorer the manners. Historians still argue whether laundry workers formed organized guilds with set fees and delivery systems, or whether it was a loose, informal trade where everyone negotiated ad hoc. Evidence is thin, but one thing is clear. Someone always carried those bundles through noisy streets under flickering lamps. As you trudge along, you notice the workers marking garments with small knots or stitches to identify the owners. It's the ancient version of writing someone's name on a laundry tag. Without it, chaos would reign. Imagine trying to tell one white tunic from another in a city of thousands. You grin at the thought, some poor soul arguing, "No, that sweat stain is definitely mine." The night air cools your skin, and suddenly you notice how heavy your own tunic feels, still damp, still carrying the faint odor of river mud. Around you, families settle in for supper, the smell of roasting duck mixing with wood smoke. The laundry workers, though, keep moving, shadows with burdens on their backs, slipping in and out of thresholds until the stacks finally shrink. One boy whispers a joke as you pass a row of grand villas. "We should wear these clothes for a night, walk around like kings, then wash them again before morning. Who would know?" The others chuckle nervously. You picture it for a moment, you in pleated linen, perfumed and gleaming under torchlight, sipping wine like you belonged. Then you shake your head. The truth is, you probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes before someone noticed the starch dust under your nails. Still, you can't shake the irony. Every polished citizen in Memphis owes their nightly radiance to tired hands trudging through dark streets with bundles of cloth. And tonight you're one of them. The coins clink softly in the pouch meager, but proof of labor. The Nile glimmers faintly in the distance, a reminder that tomorrow it all begins again. By the time the last stack is gone, the city has quieted. Only dogs bark and distant lyres hum from taverns. The workers exchange weary nods and scatter toward home. You linger a moment under the stars, realizing you've walked through the invisible artery that keeps Egyptian fashion alive. And with that, your role in the secret life of laundry shifts from washer to carrier to silent witness. You wake before dawn again, though this time the rhythm feels different. Instead of the splash of water or the grind of soapstone, it's the shuffle of feet and the hum of voices rising together. You follow the sound into a square where a cluster of laundry workers gathers, rubbing their eyes, stretching sore backs, and muttering about yesterday's wages. It's not exactly a union meeting, but you can feel the undercurrent. These people aren't just washing clothes. They're also negotiating survival. A wiry man with a scar along his cheek claps his hands for attention. He's not a priest, not an official, just one of them, but the others hush when he speaks. He talks about how a certain noble hasn't paid in weeks, how another family tried to shortchange with bad copper, How someone heard the temple is about to hire extra workers at half the usual fee. The group murmurs angrily, but their voices stay low. In a city where Pharaoh's officials can crack down on dissent, you don't shout about injustice, you whisper and scheme. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian workers, from pyramid builders to temple craftsmen, sometimes staged strikes when rations were delayed or payments withheld. The most famous took place at Deir el-Medina around 1155 BCE, when artisans walked off the job to demand fair grain. Laundry workers may not have carved their names into history the same way, but the impulse was there, a push for dignity in an economy that treated them as disposable. A young woman at the edge of the crowd raises a question. What if we deliver the bundles late, just once? They'll notice then? The idea hangs in the air like forbidden incense. Imagine the chaos of noble households without their freshly pressed tunics. You almost laugh at the thought of a grand banquet where everyone arrives wrinkled and smelling faintly of Nile mud. Not exactly a power move, but effective. Quirky tidbit: ancient Egyptians believed creased linen reflected poorly on one's soul. The Book of the Dead even mentions appearing before Osiris in clothing pure and white. If wrinkled laundry suggested disorder in the afterlife, you can bet nobles weren't about to tolerate it in their courtyard dinners, which means laundry workers had invisible leverage tucked in every folded pleat. The meeting continues, with hands gesturing and shoulders shrugging. Some want to push back, others just want to get on with the day. A man with tired eyes says softly, "We can't eat wrinkles. That shuts everyone up." Hunger speaks louder than defiance. Historians still argue whether groups like this had formal organizations, proto-guilds with leaders and rules, or whether what you're seeing is just the natural rhythm of workers huddling together, venting, and making ad hoc decisions. The evidence is thin, like linen stretched too many times across a washboard. Still, you notice something: they share food. A flatbread is broken and passed, dates distributed, water skins handed around. In that moment, the square feels like a family kitchen rather than a makeshift union hall. You nibble on a crumb of bread, dry and dusty but comforting, and realize that solidarity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shares breakfast. When the gathering disperses, pairs and trios peel away, heading toward the river once more. Nothing dramatic happened, no uprising, no shouted demands, but you feel the tension beneath the surface. The whisper of collective power has been spoken aloud. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. The workers of Memphis might stand together the way the builders of Deir el-Medina once did. As you drift with the departing group, you overhear jokes traded to lighten the mood. One boy says, "If Pharaoh ever forgets his robe, let's see how divine he looks in nothing but a loincloth." The others snicker, and you catch yourself chuckling too. It's dangerous humor, but it makes the day bearable. You walk back toward the Nile with a sense that laundry is more than suds and sweat. It's also bargaining, quiet resistance, and the stubborn insistence on being seen. The scar-faced man who led the meeting catches your eye as he passes. He doesn't smile, doesn't wink, just nods once. It's a nod that says, "You're part of this struggle now, whether you like it or not." And as the first sunlight spills over the rooftops, turning the river into a path of molten gold, you realize the truth. While nobles may strut in spotless linen, it's the invisible unity of the workers that holds the city together. Without them, even Pharaoh would be wrinkled. The day stretches long, and by afternoon the heat swells until the air itself feels like damp cloth pressed against your skin. You walk with a pair of young washers carrying bundles toward the temple district, where not just nobles but also priests demand crisp, spotless linen for rituals. The temple looms ahead, its walls thick with carved hieroglyphs and painted gods staring down, eternal supervisors of human labor. As you step inside the courtyard, the smell shifts, less Nile mud, more incense and roasted offerings. The priests, bald-headed and smooth-shaven, glide about in immaculate white robes. They glance at the bundles with the impatience of men who believe their clothing is part of the divine machinery. "Purity," one mutters, eyeing a fold like it might betray a stain invisible to mortal eyes. Mainstream historical fact: temple priests in Egypt were required to bathe several times a day and change linen frequently. believing that cleanliness was a form of worship. Their laundry demands were not just vanity, but theology. A spot of grime could insult a god. Imagine working for a boss who considered a faint sweat mark a cosmic offense. The boys beside you bow deeply, though you notice one rolling his eyes when the priest turns away. They've probably heard every lecture about sacred whiteness more times than they care to count. You crouch near their basket, helping to shake out a robe before presenting it. The fabric glimmers faintly, almost glowing in the temple light. You wonder if the gods themselves can see the hours of scrubbing worked into every fiber. Quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes added natron salts not only to cleanse cloth but to make the whiteness sharper, almost blinding under the sun. So yes, they basically invented the ancient version of whiter than white detergent. You half expect to see a papyrus scroll boasting, now with 20% more shine. The handoff complete, one of the priests frowns at a tiny crease, muttering a prayer that sounds suspiciously like a complaint. You resist the urge to whisper, "Relax, Osiris isn't going to smite you for a wrinkle." Instead, you follow the workers back out, feeling the tension between sacred duty and human exhaustion. As you walk, an older man joins your group, speaking quietly. "Priests pay better than nobles," he says, "but they watch harder. No mistakes, or you'll be back in the mud." His voice has the roughness of someone who's washed linen so long his own skin feels worn thin. He scratches at his arm absently, the salt from constant waterwork leaving tiny rashes. Historians still argue whether laundry for temples was organized strictly by hired servants or whether it sometimes fell to rotating teams of commoners fulfilling a civic duty. Some evidence suggests entire households were obligated to provide labor to temples, while other sources hint at full-time professionals like the men and women you're walking with now. As the sun sinks lower, you pause near a row of statues. Shadows stretch across the courtyard, and for a moment you imagine the gods themselves. Horus, Anubis, Isis glaring at you, judging not your soul but the streak of Nile water still clinging to your sandals. It's almost funny. If the afterlife hinges on laundry quality, then you're in deep trouble. The group moves on, laughter breaking out once they're clear of priestly ears. Someone mimics the priest's solemn tone. "Behold, a wrinkle, surely a sign of apocalypse." The workers snicker, shoulders loosening as they step back into the ordinary world. Still, you notice how seriously they take the task. Jokes aside, they know that their work touches the fabric of ritual, of order, of cosmic balance. Every robe they wash isn't just clothing, it's a thread connecting humans to the divine. And though they may grumble, part of them carries pride. In the folds of that linen lies the continuity of Egypt itself. The Nile waits ahead, glinting in twilight, ready to receive tomorrow's laundry. And you, still damp from the day, realize that even the gods depend on people who spend their lives ankle-deep in river water. You return to the riverbank as twilight deepens and the air takes on that cooler edge you've been craving all day. The heat lifts, traded for a faint breeze, carrying the mixed perfume of wet reeds, distant fires, and a whiff of grilled fish. Tonight, the laundry workers finally allow themselves to relax. After hours of bending, scrubbing, hauling, and bowing, they cluster around small clay lamps, their flames flickering like tired but persistent stars. Someone passes a jug of beer thick, frothy, almost like a meal in itself. You sip cautiously. It's grainy, tangy, with bits of floating chaff, but compared to river water, it tastes like nectar. A few workers chuckle at your face, shaking their heads. "Don't worry," one says. "You get used to it after your second lifetime." You can't tell if he's joking or warning. Mainstream historical fact, Egyptians brewed beer daily, and it wasn't just for parties. It was a staple of the workers' diet, nutritious, filling, and safer to drink than water that might carry disease. Wages often came in rations of beer and bread, the true fuel behind pyramids and, yes, laundry heaps. As the beer passes, stories unfold. One man brags that he once dropped a noble's robe into the river, only for a crocodile to snatch it. "The noble thought it was divine punishment for pride," he laughs, "so I got away without a beating." The group roars and you find yourself laughing too, though you keep one eye on the black water in case the crocodile decides to come back for dessert. Quirky tidbit: some laundry workers were believed to keep little charms against evil stains. Amulets shaped like Bess the squat, cheerful dwarf god of household luck were popular. Imagine clipping a little smiling gremlin to your laundry basket as insurance against wine spills. You spot one of these trinkets dangling from a string around a woman's neck. She taps it 3 times before telling a tale, just to be safe. The stories drift from funny to wary. A woman hums softly, an old tune about the Nile's eternal flow, her voice smoothing the edges of the night. Another worker adds verses about laundry soiled in the palace kitchens, turning chores into mock-epic poetry. Everyone groans when he rhymes linen with cinnamon, but no one minds. The laughter is medicine. Historians still argue whether these workers lived together in permanent quarters or scattered among nearby villages. Some excavations hint at small clusters of huts near river laundries, almost like a company town. Others suggest they simply came from their own homes each day, hauling baskets like commuters. Either way, tonight it feels like a family. Shared hardship and shared beer turn strangers into kin. As the evening wears on, your body sinks into the rhythm of the group. Drink, joke, hum, sigh. Your arms ache from a day spent in other people's clothes, your skin tight with salt and soap. Yet there's comfort here, a sense that you're not alone in this grind. You're one thread among many woven into the endless fabric of Egyptian life. A boy near the fire yawns loudly, and someone teases him. "Careful, if you fall asleep first, we'll scrub you tomorrow." He pulls his cloak tighter and insists he's fine, but his eyelids betray him. Soon he curls up beside a basket, head resting against cloth that smells faintly of river and sweat. Not exactly lavender-scented pillows, but it works. You tilt your head back, gazing at the stars. The sky above Egypt is vast, endless, heavy with pinpricks of light. The workers around you are tiny in comparison, yet essential. Tomorrow, noblemen and priests will strut in spotless white, never imagining the laughter, blisters, and crocodile stories woven invisibly into every seam. The last lamp burns low, and conversations fade into murmurs. Someone snores softly at first, then louder, drawing a ripple of muffled giggles. You smile, too tired to resist the pull of drowsiness. The Nile laps steadily nearby, the eternal lullaby. Your own head grows heavy, and for a moment you think, maybe the gods themselves could use a nap after watching over laundry all day. The next morning, you're dragged awake by the clatter of sandals on packed earth and the scratchy sound of baskets being stacked. Your body still aches from yesterday, and when you stretch, every muscle protests. But there's no room for indulgence here. The laundry cycle waits for no one. You blink at the rising sun already glaring across the Nile, and remember the faint laughter of last night's fire still echoing in your ears. Breakfast is simple: more bread, dipped into a bowl of beans and garlic. Not exactly a 5-star spread, but it fills you. A worker nudges you and jokes, "Eat up. You'll need the strength for Pharaoh's socks." You almost spit your bread laughing, though part of you wonders if pharaohs even wore socks. It's the sort of thought that keeps you awake in a boring moment. Mainstream historical fact: Egyptian workers began their day at dawn, aligning their labor with the rhythms of the sun. Time was measured not by hours on a clock, but by shadows and seasons. Laundry, like everything else, followed that schedule. You worked until the sun told you it was time to stop. You marched toward the water again, the baskets heavier now, some filled with noble garments, others with temple linens. The temple pieces carry extra weight in your mind, not just in your arms. Sacred cloth must be spotless, untouched by impurity. Washing them isn't just a job, it's a kind of ritual. You notice one worker murmuring a small prayer before dipping the cloth, asking for forgiveness should anything stain. Quirky tidbit: Egyptians believed certain fabrics could hold magical properties. A temple garment embroidered with protective spells might carry spiritual residue, so laundry workers occasionally sprinkled natron over themselves first, basically a ritual pre-rinse for the soul. Imagine Fibrez, but for curses. You join the scrubbing and the rhythm is almost hypnotic. Dunk, twist, pound against a stone, rinse, repeat. The air fills with slaps and splashes, a percussion line echoing down the river. At one point, you're sure you hear someone beat out an actual rhythm, like a drum beat. Soon a second worker joins in, tapping stone to stone, and suddenly the laundry pit is a jam session. You half expect someone to break into dance. Historians still argue whether laundry workers were officially servants, owned by temples and households, or whether they held a slightly freer status more like contracted laborers. The line between servant, slave, and worker wasn't always neat in Egypt. What's clear, though, is that their lives orbited around service, whether to gods, nobles, or both. By midday, the sun is merciless again. Your skin stings from yesterday's burn, your shoulders raw from carrying. You dunk your head into the Nile just to cool down, instantly regretting it when a worker teases. Careful! You'll come up with a crocodile hat. You laugh, but you also keep your eyes darting nervously across the surface. Some things aren't worth joking about twice. The piles of clean cloth begin to grow, drying across reed racks. The wind carries the smell of wet linen, fresh and almost sweet. Workers step back, hands on hips, admiring their labor like artists finishing a painting. One shrugs, mutters, "By evening it'll all be dirty again." A fatalist truth spoken with weary acceptance. As you wring out one last tunic, you think about the invisible hands behind history's spotless image. Pharaoh's gleaming white robes and wall paintings? They didn't stay that way on their own. Priests striding through temples in immaculate garments? Some poor soul bled his knuckles scrubbing them. The grand illusion of cleanliness required armies of ordinary people sweating by the river. The sun tilts westward, shadows stretching long. Baskets are reloaded, muscles trembling under the weight. You can't help but imagine what happens next. The noble who complains that a robe smells too much of the river, or the priest who insists the garment doesn't feel properly blessed. The workers might nod, bow, promise to do better. But here, among themselves, they roll their eyes and mutter under their breath. You catch whispers, "If he wants divine cloth, let the gods scrub it." The laughter that follows is sharp, but brief like a sigh disguised as a joke. By the time the last garment is hauled, the Nile is quiet again. The surface reflects the pink of sunset, smooth and serene, hiding the churn of all the work it bore today. Your hands are pruned, your back screaming, but your mind is oddly calm. This is the life cycle of laundry in Egypt. Endless, exhausting, but strangely grounding. You trudge back toward camp, another day folded and wrung out, just like the linen you left behind. Tomorrow, the river will demand your arms again, but for now, the horizon glows soft, promising a sliver of rest. The night settles heavy, but it doesn't grant you silence. Camp life after a long day of laundry is its own strange rhythm-low chatter. Bursts of laughter, the hiss of fire against damp reeds. You sit with your aching legs stretched out, the solace of your feet stinging as someone passes you a cup of sour beer. It tastes faintly like vinegar mixed with bread dough, but it goes down smoother than you'd expect. Nearby, a worker sings a half-tune, half-chant, the words so old they sound like echoes. The melody drifts, lulls, and breaks into jokes about sandals with holes and baskets that never seem to empty. A few laugh. One groans and mutters, "Don't give the overseer ideas, he'll bring us more tomorrow." Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Egyptian laborers often lived in designated workers' villages near their job sites, especially if they were tied to large temple or state projects. These settlements had their own small network-spread ovens, beer brewing pits, shared sleeping huts. Life wasn't luxurious, but it carried a sense of community. You were always surrounded by people who lived exactly as you did. You lie back and stare at the stars, more brilliant than any city sky you've known. The constellations feel alive, whispering stories older than the temples. Someone points out Sopdet, the star you call Sirius, the bright herald of the Nile flood. Workers treat it almost like a shift whistle when Sirius rises. It's time to prepare for floods, for fields, and for laundry loads that double with mud-soaked robes. You silently thank the heavens it isn't flood season right now. Quirky tidbit. Some workers swore the Nile itself carried moods. If the water shimmered just right, it meant good fortune. If the river rippled oddly at dawn, you might find your cloth staying no matter how hard you scrub it. It sounds like superstition, but after a day of pounding garments into stones, You're tempted to believe the river has opinions too. The fire crackles. Someone shares gossip about a noble who refused to wear a garment because he swore it smelled of fish spirit. The workers howl with laughter, imitating the noble's wrinkled nose. One man jokes, "Next time we'll wash it in wine." You mutter that would make the nobles smell like drunken crocodiles. That earns a cheer. Historians still argue whether these communities formed close bonds of solidarity or whether competition for favor made them fractured and tense. It's possible both were true friendship around the fire, rivalry in front of the overseer. You feel that duality tonight, laughter masking fatigue, jokes covering bruises. A breeze drifts through camp, carrying the faint musk of damp linen. You close your eyes, but the sounds pull you inward, swaying, sandals scraping, someone softly humming a tune that you can't quite place. It's almost like the camp itself is singing you toward sleep. You're on the edge of dozing when the conversation turns somber. An older worker tells of a man who drowned last year, swept by the Nile while hauling cloth. Silence falls for a beat, broken only by the fire's hiss. Then someone raises their cup, murmurs a blessing, and the laughter slowly resumes, quieter now, more fragile. You realize that beneath the jokes, the beer, the gossip, every worker knows how close the river always waits. As the night deepens, a worker nearby plucks a reed flute. The tune drifts upward, soft and uneven, but soothing. You feel your eyelids droop as the notes wrap around the camp, fragile but determined, like a lullaby for the weary. You think of the linen drying on racks, catching the last hints of moonlight. Tomorrow, they'll be folded, hauled, and worn by people who never see these nights, who never know the sting of bruised palms or the ache of carrying damp cloth until your spine bends. The garments will be praised for their purity, not for the hours of river-soaked toil hidden inside. But here, in this small circle of workers, you glimpse something else: resilience. Against mud, against overseers, against crocodiles and nobles with picky noses, they endure. Their laughter is a shield, their jokes a thread, binding them together like knots in linen. Your body sags, lulled by the hum of voices and the glow of firelight. It's not luxury, but it is enough. A rough bed on sand, a belly half full of bread and beer, a heart strangely warmed by the chorus of shared exhaustion. You let the night carry you like cloth floating briefly on the Nile before the next day wrings you out again. Morning again, though it feels like you never fully left the night behind. Your eyes sting, your limbs feel like damp rope, and yet the camp stirs with a rhythm that drags you along. The Nile glimmers, mocking you with its endless coolness. It doesn't care how tired you are. The water waits always. You shuffle back to the riverbank, baskets in hand. The cloth is heavy today, temple offerings, priestly garments, a few robes said to be destined for a high feast. The overseer repeats, almost gleefully, that these must shine whiter than alabaster. You imagine dipping them in ground chalk and calling it a day, but you know the beating, the scrubbing, the pounding must happen all the same. Mainstream historical fact: temples demanded immaculately clean linen for rituals, often replacing altar cloths and priestly attire multiple times a day. Laundry workers like you provided the silent backbone of that religious cycle. Without constant cleaning, the sacred purity of the temple could not exist. The grandeur of ancient Egyptian worship rested on the backs of sore-armed scrubbers. You drag the cloth into the current. The water numbs your skin, but the sun already presses hot on your shoulders. The chant begins again: slap, pound, rinse, twist. You fall into rhythm, your mind drifting. Quirky tidbit: ancient Egyptians sometimes scented laundry with herbs, oils, or even resin, giving garments a faint perfume. The irony isn't lost on you. The workers who reek of sweat, mud, and river grime are the ones ensuring nobles smell faintly of lotus blossoms. You mutter under your breath that next time, maybe you'll perfume your own tunic, see how the overseer likes it. The day stretches, the cloth feels endless, and still there are lost small ones, desperate ones. A worker jokes about a noble tripping over his too clean robe. Another claims the crocodiles keep returning because they prefer the taste of freshly laundered cloth. The humor is brittle, but it holds you together. Historians still argue whether this constant labor was seen by workers as unbearable exploitation or simply as the natural order of life, accepted without question. You wonder yourself, are you trapped in misery or are you part of a cosmic rhythm, the unseen hands that keep the temples alive? Maybe both, maybe always both. The sun dips lower. The last cloth is wrung, folded, carried away. Your body aches in every joint, yet you feel a strange satisfaction in the sheer survival of it. You did not collapse. You did not drown. You did not quit. You endured. As night falls, you gather with your companions once more. A fire crackles, beer passes hands. A flute hums through the air. The linen lies clean and bright under temple lamps you will never see, worn by priests who will never know your name. But in this circle of workers, laughter sparks again, weak but real. And you bone-tired, river-worn, let yourself breathe. The stars burn above. The Nile flows on. You realize the secret life of laundry workers is not just toil but resilience, humor, and a quiet defiance against the endless cycle. You let the night pull you gently inward, and for the first time, you don't fight it. And now, with the fire dimming, the camp growing quieter, and the Nile flowing steady in the dark, you let your mind loosen. The sounds soften, the scrape of sandals, the faint murmur of a last joke, the sigh of reeds. The air feels cooler now, the day's heat slipping away, leaving only the hush of night. You imagine the linen swaying in the faint breeze, catching moonlight like ghostly sails. The garments will be gathered at dawn, carried far from here, but for now they simply drift, calm and still, almost like they're resting with you. Your breath slows. The aches in your body fade into background murmurs, no longer sharp, just distant reminders that you worked, that you endured, that you belong to this river's rhythm. The fire crackles less now, embers glowing faintly, their warmth gentle rather than fierce. You can almost feel that warmth cradling you, softening your muscles, easing you further into rest. Around you, voices fade one by one like stars winking out as dawn approaches. But the stars above remain, silent and steady, patient companions to your drifting thoughts. You allow yourself to imagine floating, just for a moment, not in the river's current, but in a softer stream one that carries you slowly, carefully, towards sleep. There is no overseer here, no pounding of cloth, no call of duty. Only the gentle lapping of water, the faint hum of a reed flute somewhere in the dark, and the calm of knowing that for tonight at least the work is done. And as the Nile flows on without end, so too does your rest quiet, unhurried and deep, greater than end of script. Sweet dreams.